It all started with the sound of destruction. Loud, jarring, and completely unexpected. Crack, crash, boom. My sister Emily was sitting in the living room when she heard the noise. She wheeled over to the front window and froze. Outside, a small construction crew with a bright yellow bulldozer was actively demolishing the wooden wheelchair ramp we had just installed 2 weeks ago. Emily's face went pale. I was in the kitchen when she screamed my name. I dropped everything and ran out the front door, heart pounding. And there it was, our brand new, carefully built accessibility ramp being torn apart like it was garbage. One man, wearing a bright orange vest and holding a clipboard, looked at me with zero emotion. On his face, "This is HOA property. The ramp violates design code," he said as if he were telling me what time it was. "You can't just destroy someone's disability ramp," I shouted. "My sister needs that." He shrugged and walked away as splinters flew into the air behind him. Asterisk, I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. This wasn't just about some wooden boards. This was my sister's freedom, her access to the outside world, being ripped away by people who clearly didn't care. We hadn't received any letters, no phone calls, no warnings, nothing. The Homeowners Association, or HOA, decided that our ramp didn't match the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. That was their excuse. Not that it was unsafe, or in the wrong place, or blocking anyone. Just that it didn't look right. It was the most absurd and infuriating reason I'd ever heard. Emily sat in her wheelchair at the front door, silent, tears in her eyes, watching as the last pieces of her independence were thrown into a construction dumpster like trash. Asterisk, what the HOA didn't know, though, was that Emily was not just another resident. She wasn't just my sister. She was the newly appointed governor of our state, one of the youngest ever, in fact. And the very people who thought they could quietly bulldoze her rights had no clue they had just picked a fight with someone who could literally control their funding. They thought she was powerless because she was in a wheelchair. They didn't realize they had just started a war. They were about to lose it in front of the whole country. Asterisk, Emily wasn't someone who backed down easily. Ever since we were kids, she was the one who challenged bullies, questioned teachers, and always stood up for what was right. Her wheelchair was never a limitation. It was just part of her life. After high school, she went to law school and graduated at the top of her class. She focused her career on disability rights, tirelessly fighting to create equal opportunities for people who, like her, were often ignored or underestimated. She had been appointed governor just a few months earlier, after a landslide win that shocked the political world. The headlines praised her intelligence, her calm leadership, and her fearless advocacy. But none of that mattered to the HOA that destroyed her ramp. To them, she was just a woman in a wheelchair living on their street. Asterisk, after becoming governor, Emily had to relocate temporarily while the historic governor's residence was being renovated. Rather than staying in a hotel or official quarters, she decided to stay with me or brother so we could spend more time together after years apart. We installed the ramp ourselves. It wasn't anything fancy, just a clean, strong wooden ramp with safety rails and solar lights along the edge so she could come and go independently at any time. We followed every state regulation. It was functional, safe, and most importantly, essential. When we first built it, some neighbors gave us odd looks, but no one said anything outright. We never imagined it would become a target. Asterisk, when the ramp was gone, Emily was furious, but she wasn't emotional. She was focused. I could see the fire in her eyes as she sat down at the dining table that night and opened her laptop. "They think they can bulldoze my rights," she said quietly. "Let's see how they feel when I bulldoze their funding." She immediately contacted her legal team, laid out the details, and requested every document she could find on that particular HOA's practices, history, and funding sources. Within an hour, her office was drafting an official letter direct. Professional, but full of undeniable weight. The HOA had messed with the wrong person. They were about to find out that this wasn't just about a ramp it was about basic human dignity. Asterisk, the very next morning, Emily's official letter was hand-delivered to the HOA office. It wasn't some emotional outburst. It was a sharply worded legal warning backed by state authority. She outlined how the HOA had violated accessibility laws by removing a necessary structure without notice or due process. Reminded them that as governor, She had oversight over the funding distributed to private associations that benefited from public grants. But even before they could digest the weight of her letter, Emily dropped a bombshell online. Asterisk, she filmed a short video. Sitting in her wheelchair right in front of the rubble that used to be her ramp, with her usual calm, confident voice, she addressed the camera. "This is where my wheelchair ramp used to be," she said. "It was removed yesterday by my neighborhood's HOA without any warning. I am the governor of this state, and I believe in accessibility, justice, and accountability. This is not just about me. This is about every person who's ever been told they don't belong because of how they look, how they move, or what they need to live with dignity." She ended with a simple, powerful line. "You tried to silence me, but now everyone will hear." Asterisk, within hours, the video exploded. Tens of thousands of shares. News stations picked it up. Disability rights organizations reposted it. Hashtags. Like hashtag accessibility for all and hashtag ramp rights trended across platforms. People from all walks of life, families with disabled loved ones, veterans in wheelchairs. Caregivers began flooding the HOA's website and social media, with angry comments and messages of support for Emily. Some residents even marched to the HOA office and demanded an explanation. Asterisk, that same evening. The HOA board members, who once acted so smugly, now looked completely rattled. They sent us an email titled, "Formal Apology for the Misunderstanding." It was full of empty words blaming internal miscommunication, saying they were deeply sorry for any inconvenience caused. But Emily wasn't moved. "They're not sorry they did it," she said. "They're sorry the world saw them do it." She knew this moment wasn't just personal anymore. It had become a symbol for a larger fight. And she wasn't about to let it pass without real consequences. Asterisk. 2 days after the apology email, things began to shift and fast. Emily instructed her legal team to begin a full review of the state grants that had been allocated to various homeowners associations, including ours. It turned out that our HOA had received multiple development subsidies and infrastructure grants over the past 5 years, money that was approved and distributed through state channels. Now that Emily was governor, she had the authority to reassess and redirect those funds. Her office released a formal statement saying that all HOAs receiving state funds would be reviewed for compliance with accessibility laws and non-discrimination policies. The message was clear: if you take public money, you follow public rules, and that includes respecting disability access. Asterisk, behind the scenes, the panic was real. I overheard board members calling emergency meetings, consulting lawyers, even scrambling to delete old posts and documents. But it was too late. The internet never forgets, and neither did the public. Emily's actions struck a nerve across the country. Other families started coming forward with similar stories: ramps removed, permits denied, service animals questioned, all because of arbitrary HOA rules. Her video had ignited something bigger than she expected. Encouraged by the response, she proposed new legislation, a state law that would make it illegal for any HOA to remove or deny accessibility features without a court order. The bill, nicknamed Emily's Law by the media, gained overwhelming support in the state legislature. It passed in record time, with cheers erupting from disability rights activists and advocates who had waited years for something like this. Asterisk, meanwhile, the HOA, desperate to avoid further public backlash and legal trouble, suddenly changed its tone. They offered to rebuild the ramp, this time at their own expense, using licensed contractors and ADA-compliant materials. They sent us blueprints, arranged safety inspections, and even asked Emily to approve the final design. Emily, always professional, reviewed everything and allowed the rebuild in one condition: the ramp would include a public plaque, not about her, but about equal access. The new ramp went up in 3 days, was wide, sturdy, and beautifully built. Solar lights lined the sides. It was safer than the original, and this time it stood tall, not just as an entrance, but as a statement. The people who once ripped away her independence were now the ones who had to rebuild it. They did so under the very authority they once tried to ignore. Asterisk a few weeks later. The new ramp stood proudly at the front of our house, stronger, safer, and now completely untouchable. The once hostile HOA board was quiet, their smugness replaced with visible discomfort every time they passed by. On a sunny afternoon, Emily held a press conference right there at the top of the new ramp. Camera crews from local and national news stations surrounded her as she spoke, her voice steady and full of quiet strength. She didn't shout or accuse, she simply told the truth. "This ramp represents more than wood and screws," she said. "It represents freedom. It represents dignity. For many people, it represents survival. What happened here wasn't just about my personal rights, it was about whether our communities are truly inclusive or just pretending to be." Asterisk the crowd applauded, and for the first time, some HOA members in attendance looked ashamed. Emily took a moment to thank the thousands of people who had supported her, from neighbors to lawmakers to strangers across the world. She didn't mention the HOA's name once, not because she was afraid, but because the point had already been made. The real victory wasn't about punishing them. It was about protecting the next person who couldn't fight back. That's why Emily's law was already making a difference. Across the state, HOAs were scrambling to update their policies. Accessibility training became mandatory. Several other states even began drafting similar legislation. Asterisk. As for our neighborhood, the transformation was real. People who once kept their distance from Emily now waved when they passed by. Some even stopped to ask how they could make their own homes more accessible for visiting relatives. A few residents apologized, in person, not for tearing down the ramp, but for not speaking up when it happened. Emily accepted every apology with grace. Not because she forgot, but because she believed change required humility. It's not bitterness. Asterisk in the end, the HOA learned the hardest way possible that abusing power has consequences. They underestimated a woman in a wheelchair because they thought silence meant weakness. But Emily's silence was never weakness. It was strategy. And when she spoke, the world listened.
Nice.
The ramp they bulldozed now stands as a monument to what happens when the underestimated rise up, when justice finds a voice, and when the ones who build barriers find themselves standing on the wrong side of history. Asterisk.